Chapter 1971. However, Colton was keeping her company like a normal boyfriend. He was worried that she would catch a cold, so he tightly tucked her into the bed. He was worried that she would be uncomfortable with her pregnancy, so he didn't dare to close his eyes. He was not used to taking care of other people, but he had learned how to take care of her. After a long while, Freya squinted and looked at him through the pillar of light. "You should go do your own stuff. I'll be fine." Colton placed his hand on her eyes and said, "You shouldn't talk. Close your eyes and get some rest." Colton. She was tired. Her eyelids felt heavy, but she tried her best to open them. She called out to him softly and said, "I have never thought of having an abortion." Colton lowered his head to look at her. Even though she was exhausted, she still forced herself to explain to him before falling asleep. He did not know whether he should laugh at her or not. He leaned over slightly and played with her hair with his finger as he stared at her face. Something came into his head, and the corner of his lips curled upward. By the time Freya woke up, it was already evening. She got up and rubbed her forehead. She did not know why, but she easily got tired recently. Was it because she was pregnant? Suddenly, she remembered Didi. She hastily collected her hair with a hairband and rushed toward the restroom. She wanted to wash her face to freshen herself up, but when she saw the doodle on her face, she was stunned for a moment, and then she shouted, "Colton." Colton had already gone back to the company, and he sneezed. Leonardo was in the middle of reporting his job. He was interrupted by his sneeze, and he lifted his head up. "Do you need me to turn up the temperature?" Colton waved his hand. "That's not necessary." He put down the document and massaged his nose. "Don't tell anyone about Freya's pregnancy yet. There are too many people in the company, and I don't want things to get out of control." Leonardo nodded. "Understood." He picked up the document and exited the office. Leaning against the chair, Colton thought about something and chuckled. He did not know if she had already woken up or not, but if she had woken up, he was certain that she would be scolding him when she saw the thing he had left on her face. Meanwhile, at Taylorton, Nolace was using his laptop on the couch. He seemed to be checking on something, and Edison knocked on the door. "Sir, after Mrs. Pruitt arrived in Bassburg, she went to look for Ms. Pruitt at Tenet, and," he lifted his head and asked, "And what?" "She brought Didi to Bassburg with her," said Edison. Didi was Ken's daughter, but she was raised by Freya ever since she was born. If Sandy brought her to Bassburg, there was only one thing she wanted to do: threaten Freya with Didi. Nolace closed the laptop and raised his head. "I think she doesn't know I'm in Bassburg yet, right?" Edison shook his head. "Not many people know that you're in Bassburg. They only know that you're having a long business trip. Besides, you haven't exposed yourself in Bassburg, so there is no way she would know you're here." Nolace put the laptop on the table and rose to his feet. "Send someone to keep an eye on her. Also, get the people in Yarramore to find out who Mrs. Pruitt has been in touch with recently." "Are you worried about something?" Edison felt that Nolace was being very cautious, but he was certain that it was not because he was afraid of Sandy. Nolace parted his tightly thinned lips and said, "I'm sure she didn't come all the way here for Freya. Don't forget, she hates the Knowles and me to the core because of her son's death. 3 years ago, the Pruitts knew that I was in a relationship with Daisy. Daisy has announced her engagement, but she didn't tell anyone who she's engaged to. Do you think my aunt won't suspect that I'm the one Daisy is engaged to?" Edison was stunned. "But even so, she should have targeted the Knowles first if she knows that you aren't in Yarramore." Chapter 1972. However, Sandy did not make any moves against the Knowles even after Nolace came to Zlokova. Nolace said, "That's because my grandfather is there. She wouldn't dare to do anything to the Knowles. Besides, it's exactly because I'm not in Yarramore that it'll be easier to take me out than going up against the Knowles." Edison felt he was right. If something were to happen to Nolace when he was in another country, it was something that both Sandy and Donald would want to see. In any case, regardless of what Sandy was up to, it was always not wrong to stay alert. The night was falling, and the city lit up. Colton returned to the Goldman mansion. After getting out of the car, he rushed all the way to the mansion. When he heard from the butler that Maisie was in the study room, he went upstairs. Maisie was sitting behind the table, working on her new design with rapt attention. When she heard the knocking on the door, she froze and said, "Come in." Colton pushed the door open and went inside. "Mom." Maisie squinted. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be with Freya right now?" He stopped in front of her and sat on the chair. "I have something to tell you." Maisie put down her pen and placed her hand on her forehead. "What is it?" "Freya's mother has arrived in Basburg, but she's up to something no good. I want to dispatch a bodyguard and 2 maids to the Seaview Villa. After all, I'm more comfortable with them since they work for us." Maisie straightened her body and chuckled. "Sure, go ahead. I'll inform your father about it." Clearing his throat, Colton hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Freya, Maisie waved her hand. "Just say whatever you want to say. You weren't this shilly-shally when you were a kid." It seemed to Maisie that the older her sons became, the less they wanted to talk to her. "She's pregnant." "I see." "She is." Maisie suddenly realized what he was talking about, and she jerked up. She pressed her hand on the desk and asked again, "What did you say? Who is pregnant?" Colton placed his hand on his forehead and replied, "It's Freya." Maisie made a few quick steps to him. "Brat, you." Colton knew that his mother would punish him, so he was mentally prepared for it. After all, he couldn't keep everyone in the dark forever, and they would learn about Freya's pregnancy sooner or later. Thus, he figured that it was better for him to tell them about it now. Besides, things were different now since Sandy was in Basburg. If Maisie knew about Freya's pregnancy, she might be able to protect her better. Maisie took a few deep breaths to calm herself down. "Like father, like son. I know it's a bit too early for us to have a kid, but I'll take all the responsibility," Colton said with a serious face. "Of course, you are." Maisie poked his shoulder and said sternly, "Brat, you seriously have surprised me this time. But I'll forgive you, since you chose to confess to me." It was already 9 at night when Colton returned to the Seaview Villa. He pushed his door open, thinking about how he should explain the things he left on Freya's face. However, he saw that Freya was standing in front of the window. She looked lonely, and it seemed to him that something was troubling her. He frowned slightly and walked toward her. "Have you eaten dinner?" Freya turned her head around to look at him. Her head was occupied with something else, so she had already forgotten everything he had done. "Yeah." She set her jaw tightly, and then she said, "Colton, can you do me a favor?" "What is it?" he asked. "Can you help me to bring Didi to me?" she asked. Colton frowned. "Your brother's daughter?" Freya looked at him and said, "She won't have a good time around my mother. My mother doesn't treat her well. She's only 4 years old, and I don't want her to become like me." She was confident that her mother wouldn't let her take Didi away if she went to confront her. Chapter 1973. Colton lowered his head to look at her. He could see how worried she was about that kid. After a short while, he said, "Okay. I'll help you." He knew very well that even though Didi was Ken's daughter, she was brought up by Freya. Besides, it was not a problem for him to raise another kid. Freya was surprised. "You're fine with it?" Colton took off his jacket and put it on the hanger. "I'll say yes to everything as long as you ask." Freya was stunned. Colton approached her and placed his hand on her stomach. "But you need to promise me that you won't go to see your mother." The next day, Freya came downstairs after waking up at 10 a.m. When she saw there were another 4 maids in the living room, she was slightly taken aback. The maids also noticed her, and they all greeted her respectfully. "You're awake, Miss Pruitt." "Who are you guys?" "Ma'am asked us to come and take care of you. If you have anything you need, just let us know." Oh yeah, while you were sleeping, we prepared a nutritious meal for you as your breakfast. You're pregnant right now, so you need some nutritious food to make your body stronger. Freya was stunned. She knew which ma'am the maid was talking about. She was Colton's mother, Maisie. Mrs. Goldman knows that I'm pregnant? Did Colton tell her about it? Meanwhile, at Tenet. When Daisy came out of the elevator and walked across the corridor, she overheard a discussion. Seriously? Freya has a daughter? I heard it from her mother. Her mother said that Freya has a 4-year-old daughter and that she abandoned her daughter in order to become one of the Goldmans. Oh gosh, if this is real, then Freya will be in big trouble. I didn't expect her to be someone like that. Just when someone was about to say something, they saw Daisy standing at the door. Their expressions changed. Daisy? Freya was Daisy's assistant. Not only that, but both of them were very close friends. Therefore, Daisy was the last person they wanted to run into when talking about Freya behind her back. Daisy looked at them expressionlessly and asked, "Where did you guys hear these things from?" They told her that they learned it from Facebook. It was Sandy who exposed them. Regardless of whether it was the truth or not, things wouldn't end well once they were spread in the internet. Daisy assumed that everyone in Basburg already knew about it. Daisy pulled her phone out. There was a post about Freya abandoning her daughter on Facebook. She stuffed her phone and left with a dark expression on her face. They all had seen Daisy's expression just now, and all of them thought she would confront Freya. After all, there was a probability that Freya had not told them about her daughter so that she could become one of the Goldmans. The post was spreading fast on the internet, and Freya, who was revealed to be Colton's girlfriend, was brought into the spotlight. Her mother accused her of abandoning her daughter in order to become the daughter-in-law of the Goldmans. Most of the netizens were scolding Freya, and their words were even more vicious when they were criticizing Daisy in the past. How could she deceive the Goldmans? This girl is such a whore. People like her who abandoned their kids for a better life should just die. Why doesn't she just go to die? At Black Gold, Colton tossed the magazine on the table expressionlessly. Leonardo took a glance at the cover, and just as he expected, it was about Freya. He did not know about the things between Colton and Freya. He only knew about it when Colton made their relationship public. Before that, he had been under the impression that Colton was going to spend the rest of his life with his work. Chapter 1974. Leonardo. Colton lifted his eyelids. Contact the publishing companies that published these magazines and tell them to get the money ready. Money? Leonardo was stunned for a while before understanding what Colton was going to do. You're going to sue them? Colton put the cap of the pen back on and said, "We're going to sue them for slander, disinformation, and spreading fictitious facts to degrade the reputation of others. Whether or not they want to compensate for our loss or shut down, I'll let them make the choice." Leonardo nodded. Understood. As soon as Leonardo came out of the office, he saw Daisy rushing down the corridor. However, before he could say anything, Daisy pushed the door to the office open. Colton. Colton raised his head to see Daisy pressing her hands on the desk. Has Mrs. Pruitt come to Basburg? He frowned. Yes. Daisy took a deep breath and continued. Now she's spreading fake news to discredit Freya. If Freya sees those things she said, she will. Her situation is kind of special right now, and she mustn't have any mood swings. If she's affected by this, I know that she's pregnant. She was stunned for a moment and then let out a sigh of relief. She was worried that it would have bad effects on the baby in Freya's womb if Freya learned about what her mother did. However, when she came to look for Colton that day, he did not seem to know about Freya's pregnancy at all, and she nearly told him about that just now. Colton said, "Daisy, I know you're worried about her, but rest assured. I'll help her to settle everything." Daisy lowered her head and thought about something. Then how are you going to explain Didi to Mom and Dad? I'm worried that they might misunderstand Freya if they see the news. He chuckled. You don't have to worry about that. Our mother is far smarter than you think she is. Do you think she believes the news on the internet or us? I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that, right? Daisy was relieved. Just when she was about to leave, Colton said, Daisy. She turned her head around. Yeah? You and Nolace need to be careful as well. Daisy was stunned, and it took her a few moments to come around to her senses. What do you mean? Nolace refused to reveal himself in Basburg because he's hiding from Donald. Since Donald is still alive, he'll undoubtedly get his revenge on Nolace. You're in a dangerous spot since you're living with him. You should stop going around alone, and don't let anyone find out about the relationship between you and Nolace. Daisy fell silent. When she came out of the building, she stopped in front of her car and thought about Colton's words. Nolace had said before that they couldn't have a wedding for the time being because there was still a problem that he hadn't solved yet. Now that she thought about it, it seemed to her that the problem he was talking about was Donald. But why didn't Nolace tell me anything about it? Did he not want me to worry about him? That's why he has been keeping everything to himself. In the Express Inn, Sandy was still criticizing and complaining about her daughter in front of the reporters. The reporters and the crowd surrounding the entrance couldn't help but sympathize with her. After all, she had traveled a long way with her granddaughter to a foreign country to look for her daughter, who'd disowned her mother and child. Suddenly, a reporter received a phone call. No one knew what the person on the other side of the line said, but the reporter's face changed, and he said, "Yes, sir. We'll leave now." The rest of the reporters were confused. A lot more other reporters received the same phone call as well. All of them shut down their cameras and left without any hesitation. When Sandy saw that all of the reporters had left and that the hall had become empty, her face sank. Chapter 1975. Sandy vaguely heard them talking about the Goldmans. Humph. It seems like I've underestimated that girl. Sandy returned to her room. When she saw that Dee was sitting with her entire body shivering in the corner, she flew into a rage. How can you be so useless? I brought you here, yet you can't do anything. You should have died in your mother's womb back then. Dee lowered her head and sobbed. Sandy walked up to her and pulled her up from the floor. She shrunk and cried, "Grandma, I'll be a good girl." Sandy kicked her into the corner and shouted, "Stop crying. All you know is crying." Dee fell on the floor. Her back hit the desk, knocking off the glass of water on top of the desk and causing the water in the cup to spill across the desk. The cup fell on her forehead, and some of the water dampened her hair. A red welt soon appeared on her forehead. Her cheeks were wet, and her countenance was pale. She sobbed weakly, and her body was trembling. Just when Sandy was about to hit her again, the bell rang. Sandy clicked her tongue and pulled Dee back into the room. She tied her up, put a gag into her mouth, and pushed her into the cupboard. Before closing the door, she warned her. "You'd better stay quiet. I'll beat you up if you make even the slightest noise." She closed the cupboard and then went to answer the door. She was stunned when she saw the group of bodyguards outside the door. "Who are you?" The bodyguards retreated to the side to make way for Colton. He stood in front of the door and asked, "Where is Dee?" Sandy did not expect him to come for Dee. This must be that bitch's idea. Humph. There's no way I'll let them take Dee away. Are you serious, Mr. Goldman? Dee is my granddaughter. Shouldn't you be taking care of my daughter? Why are you even so concerned about a girl who is unrelated to you? I'm not here to talk to you, Colton said expressionlessly. I'll repeat my question again. Where is Dee? Sandy smiled. She's in a safe place. You don't have to worry about her. Colton did not say anything. He turned his head sideways and nodded at the group of bodyguards. The bodyguard standing beside him barged into the room, shocking Sandy. She tried to stop them from going into the room as she said, "What do you think you're doing? Even if Basburg is your territory, I can sue you as well for trespassing." A bodyguard pushed her into the wall and walked into the room. There was nothing Sandy could do other than watch them warily as they searched through the room. The group of bodyguards searched through every corner of the room, but they couldn't find Dee. One of them walked up to Colton and whispered something into his ear. Sandy let out a sigh when they couldn't find Dee. Mr. Goldman, Dee isn't with me right now, so you guys can save your energy. Besides, she's my granddaughter. Do you think I'll hurt her? Colton looked at Sandy with a cold gaze and said, you can even hurt your own daughter, and you expect us to trust you? Sandy harumphed and said, she disowned me and doesn't want to take care of me. She's my daughter, so I have every right to complain about her. Colton's face sank as he said, really? He walked up to Sandy and stopped in front of her. Are you not worried about karma for what you did to Freya, Mrs. Pruitt? Karma? Sandy said, raising her voice, my son is dead, but why didn't the Knowles and Knowles get what they deserved? If there is karma in this world, then Knowles should pay for my son's life first. Colton let out a cold smile. Ken deserved to die, and so do you. Sandy's face turned pale, and her entire body was shaking due to her anger. Mr. Goldman, I suggest you stay out of this. The feud between the Knowles and me isn't something that you can interfere with. Chapter 1976. I don't even care to intervene. He scoffed and then added at the end, but Freya is one of the members of the Goldmans now, and you're not in the position to interfere in her affairs. If you dare to do so again and continue to confuse the public, don't blame me for not reminding you. After all, even the foundation of the Reeses, a family that sat above you, could be shaken and brought down by the Goldmans, let alone your family. Sandy trembled violently as if she had been shocked by electricity, and the blood on her cheeks gradually faded. He's not threatening me based on those empty words. Given the Goldmans' strength, he can indeed live up to his words. The Goldmans and the Hathaways are now one, and the power of the two families will even give the Nobles a hard time. Seeing that Colton was leaving with his men, Sandy stumbled and could only hold on to the wall for support. She gnashed her teeth secretly. Damn it, that bitch's backer is truly powerful. However, although I can't threaten the Goldmans, as long as I still have Dee with me, the B*TCH won't dare to disobey me. In the parking lot, Colton got into the car and asked the bodyguard sitting in the front passenger seat, is the child really not in the room? The bodyguard reported, she's really not there. I didn't even see any children's shoes or clothes. Colton's expression looked calm but gradually dimmed. However, the bodyguard paused for a few seconds and continued. There's a glass cup at the foot of the table, there were water stains in the glass cup, and there's a pool of water on the table, but there were not too many stains on the ground. It stands to reason that if the cup was accidentally knocked over, there should be marks on the ground. Even if the floor had been wiped earlier, anyone would have picked the glass cup up. What's more, the table should have been hit by a huge force. If she weren't paying attention, she would have at most hit the corner of the table. The force wouldn't be strong enough to knock the glass cup over, would it? Colton lifted his gaze all of a sudden. No, the child should still be in the room. Judging from Sandy's temperament, since she needed Dee to threaten Freya, she had no reason to let Dee out of her sight. The bodyguard was astonished. Could it be that she has hidden her? But where would she hide the child? And if she did hide her, why didn't the child make a sound? Colton said indifferently, send other men to secretly keep an eye on the entire hotel. If there's any movement, no matter what happens, take the child and get away. Since she refuses to hand the child over, we'll just grab her from her. The bodyguard nodded. Yes, I'll contact them now. Within a day, all news about Freya on the internet's trending list had been removed. It was not difficult for one to guess the force behind this incident, everyone knew that it was the Goldmans. Speaking of that, Black Gold's official website and social media accounts soon released a notice to the publishing companies and told them that they were going to sue them for spreading rumors and slanders. Coincidentally, the Goldmans' actions were enough to neutralize the news that claimed Freya had abandoned her daughter and prove the public wrong. After all, The Goldmans were a prominent family in Basberg. If Freya really had a daughter with another man and abandoned the baby in order to gain power and wealth, it was estimated that the Goldmans would never allow her into the family. If she had the ability to get the Goldmans to clarify the matter on her behalf and even sue the few unlucky publishers directly, the possibility of this being a rumor was very high. At that time, Daisy stayed with Freya in the Seaview Villa. Freya was peeling an apple. I don't even pay much attention to the matter, so you don't have to worry about me. Daisy picked up the couch's cushion and placed it on her thighs. Colton has already handled it for you. You should stay home and take good care of yourself during this period. You don't need to worry about the rest. Freya paused for a split second, and her eyelashes twitched. But she has Didi with her now, so how can I rest assured? Chapter 1977. Daisy held the back of Freya's hand. You have to trust Colton. He'll definitely solve this matter. As for Didi, I know she's an innocent child too, and Colton won't just sit by idly and watch as she perishes. Freya smiled. Daisy waited for a while before leaving. She walked out of the courtyard, and a familiar car was parked beside the road outside the courtyard. The rear window slowly lowered, and the person in the car was Nolace. The light was reflected on the glass, and he was wearing a white shirt, which was accompanied by his unparalleled appearance. Daisy stopped in front of the car. How did you know I was here? She had not told Nolace that she was at Freya's. Nolace gave off a faint smile. I guessed that you'd see the news, and from what I know about you, you'd be here. Daisy opened the door, got into the car, and whispered, Is there anything you don't know about me? Nolace stroked her hair. You can learn more about me too. Speaking of understanding, she really did not know much about Nolace. Nolace was excellent, as if he had no flaws, and because of this, she could not see through him. Maybe it was because he had been hiding them too well, or maybe he only wanted to show her his best side and only wanted her to see that side of him. And the bad, the ugly, those were all isolated from her. Nolace's gaze was fixed on her side profile. Are you mad? She shook her head. You're hiding something from me. He stared at her, narrowed his eyes, and did not deny it. I am. Daisy was stunned. You actually confess so quickly. Nolace fiddled with the ends of her hair with his fingers and gave off a pregnant smirk. Because that's the truth, and I won't lie to you. As soon as these words come out of her mouth, it means that she must have found out about something. So it'd be meaningless if I were to continue to deny it. Daisy lowered her gaze. It really is because of Donald, isn't it? Nolace responded with a hum, gently took her into his arms, and rested his chin on the top of her head. You don't have to worry about me. How could I not be worried? She continued whispering, You keep everything a secret from me. He chuckled abruptly and lowered his eyes. If you're able to protect yourself and start preventing yourself from getting hurt, I'll tell you everything in the future. Daisy pursed her lips, leaned in his arms, and said nothing. After arriving at Taylorton, Daisy entered the villa. Nolace stopped in the yard and received a call from Yarramore. The other party had looked into the recent call records that Sandy had made in Yarramore and found that several calls came from overseas numbers. He stepped into the entryway and took a pair of home slippers out of the shoe cabinet. Which region's number is it? The other party reported, the number starts with +75. We checked the region, and it originates from the southern part of the East Islands. Okay, I see. Nolace ended the call, took off his tie, let it go, and the tie dropped on the back of the couch. His expression looked obscure and complicated, and he was more certain that Sandy had been contacting Donald secretly. Ken's death has made her lose her only support and all hope. She's exasperated but can't avenge her beloved son by herself. The enemy of her enemy is a friend, and the person that fits the description the best in the world is Donald. Donald isn't a fool, and Sandy isn't his drive for revenge. She's at most one of his pawns, but she must have made up her mind in order for her to risk her life when she decided to work with the tiger. After taking a shower, Daisy wrapped her wet hair in a towel and walked out of the bathroom. When she stopped at the counter to look for a hairdryer, she accidentally knocked off the ring tied to the silver necklace on the table. Chapter 1978. The ring fell to the floor, leaving a soft, crisp sound. Daisy squatted down to pick up the ring and found a small gap in the middle of the ring. She took the ring into her hand and wondered. How could the ring, seeing something? She was stunned for a moment and took the ring apart, revealing a device that was smaller than an ant in front of her eyes. In the study, Nole sat behind the desk. His fingers were interlocked, and his hands were propped against his chin as he was still thinking about the matter between Donald and Sandy. The screen of his cell phone lit up. He glanced at it and saw a notification informing him that the tracking device had gone offline. He could not help but be astounded. He subconsciously reacted to something in his mind, but Daisy had already pushed open the door. Nole Snolls. She rushed over and slammed the ring he had given her 3 years ago in front of him. It was obvious that she had discovered the secret hidden in the ring. You'd better have an explanation for this. Nolace rubbed his temples and laughed. I can no longer hide it, can I? It seems that you've discovered my little tricks. Daisy stared at him. So, you did install a tracking device in the ring? It's no wonder he can always guess where I am, whether it was 3 years ago or now. He even knew I forgot to put the ring back on after I took it off while filming. I really thought he was a god. It turns out that he's installed a tracking device on me. But why? Why would he need to install a tracking device on me? Is it to monitor my daily schedule, or is he so worried about me? Nolace got up, walked around the corner of the desk, and toward her. Daisy. Daisy avoided his approach almost subconsciously, and even she was astonished by her own reaction. Nolace's outstretched hand stopped midair, and he retracted it when he noticed something. The atmosphere in the study room was stagnant and silent for a moment. After a long time, he turned around and clenched his hands. I'm sorry about that. You should go back and get some rest first. Daisy looked up at him. She did not mean to dodge him just now. She was just a little confused. After all, Nolace had installed a tracking device on the ring without her consent. She did not even know about its existence. He had done so to monitor her whereabouts, and it scared her. She opened her lips. Nolace, don't you plan to explain yourself? Half of his facial outline was flickering under the light and the shadows, and she could not get a clear view of his expression at the moment. I don't want to lie to you, but I'll admit that I have my selfish thoughts. Daisy froze in place. He turned his head sideways and glanced at her with a gloomy expression. Daisy, I'm not as perfect as you think I am. I'm no god, so how can I be that perfect? All she's seen were just my tricks and means. He had always wanted Daisy to see his goodness, so he would try his best to be perfect when she was around. His gentleness and consideration, meticulous care, and pampering could only be hers to see. Whatever she liked, he would try his best to satisfy her, including her filming career. No matter how unwilling he felt deep down when he saw her filming romantic scenes with other male actors, he still chose to support her. He could not even have the idea of possessing her to himself, locking her by his side, and not allowing anyone to even get a peep of her. Everything he had done was because he did not want her to see his truest color. More than anything else, he was even more afraid of her rejection. That was why he felt as if his mind had been blended into a mess when she discovered the miniature tracking device in the ring. When she finds out that I was never as perfect as I seemed to be, will she regret her choice? But if she were to regret it, it'd already be too late for me. Chapter 1979. I can no longer let her go. A palm abruptly grasped his fist, and the warmth from the hand filled his silent heart. Nolace was slightly startled. He looked down at Daisy, who had approached him while he was in a daze, and his thin lips were tightly pursed. Daisy lowered her head. Nolace, I don't care if you're perfect or not. Really? Nolace wrapped his arms around her waist, took her into his arms, and lifted her chin. His lips seemed to be moving closer to her cheek, and the scorching breath brushed against her fair skin. Do you really know me? I'm not as perfect as you think. I'm a very stingy person. I've always wished that you would only belong to me, and I always want to gouge out anybody's eyes whenever they get to feast their eyes on you. He brushed his 5 fingers through the ends of her dry hair, placed his hands on the back of her head, and rubbed the corners of her lips with his fingertips. If you get bored of me and abandon me someday, then I really don't know what I'll do when the time comes. Daisy saw his profound madness through the deep eddies in his eyes, which was a hint of desire that had been repressed and restrained. If that day were to come and the lock holding the desire down would break, it would burst out of the cage and torch everything in its path like wildfire. And when that happened, the flame would devour everything in its path, and there would not be a trace of rationality left. She lowered her gaze and whispered, "Who would abandon you?" "I really don't know what you're thinking about." Knowles moved another half an inch closer to her and sounded muted. "But what should I do if I lack a sense of security?" She was astonished, and her eyelashes trembled slightly. "Shouldn't I be the one who lacks the sense of security? With this appearance of his, how does he expect me to feel secure?" Knowles kissed the corners of her eyes and cheeks, then fixed his eyes on her lips. "Will you regret it?" Daisy paused for a split second and asserted that she would never regret it. Knowles gave off a faint smile, picked her up, placed her on the desk, and wrapped his arms around her. "Even if you regret it now, it's already too late. Daisy, you'll be held responsible for my feelings in this lifetime." She choked and propped her hands against the chest that was approaching her. "Are you saying that I'm responsible for your fragile emotions for life?" He replied, "Yes, it's all on you now." Daisy wanted to say something else, but he abruptly sealed her lips. After getting a shallow peck for a short while, it turned into a deeply entangled kiss. The dimmed yellow light shined on the two of them, making the atmosphere look warm and pretty. The two finally separated from each other after a long time. Daisy's cheeks looked delicate and flushed. She rubbed her lips and whispered, "It's going to turn numb if this continues." He sneered. "If you can't even take this, what should I do when we want to have babies?" The escalation in the topic raised the temperature in her head. She turned her face away and hesitantly said, "That. It's not the time yet." Knowles picked her up all of a sudden, and she was flustered, only to see him chuckle. "You'll have to get used to it eventually." Daisy hit him, and the smacks that landed on his body felt like cotton swabs. I haven't finished assessing your crime just yet. You won't be forgiven so easily this time around." He stepped out of the study. "Then let's go back to the room where you can take things slowly while you assess my crime." Back in the bedroom, Daisy was placed on the bed by him. She closed her eyes nervously, and after a while, she heard his hoarse laughter. "Aren't you going to assess my crime?" She opened her eyes and looked away embarrassedly. "The position that you're in, how do you expect me to assess it?" He turned over and exchanged places with her. He then rested his head on one hand, looking extremely languid as he stared up at her. "You may begin now." Daisy's cheeks were on the brink of going up in flames, and she sat up abruptly. "I'll stop here for now." Upon feeling that she was sitting on something, her whole body stiffened. Knowles dragged her into his arms, held her down, and chuckled. "I told you not to move, but you kept on moving." "I didn't. It's obviously your..." Knowles looked at the woman in his arms. "If you don't go to bed now, I can't guarantee I can hold it back any longer." Chapter 1980. Daisy shut her mouth, lay obediently on his chest, and tried to get some sleep. Knowles rolled over and hugged her. A thick layer of the quilt was clamped in between her waist and his lower abdomen to prevent them from rubbing against each other. He despised coaxing her with tricks to get her to go all the way with him. What he wanted was her complete willingness. At the same time, in the Comfort Inn, because Colton had come to visit her earlier today, Sandy did not dare to let her guard down. Sandy packed her luggage and opened the cupboard because it was already midnight. Didi had been locked in the cupboard for a whole day without getting any food or a drop of water. She was too feeble at the moment. The strong light forced her to open her eyes slightly, and her voice sounded very weak. "Grandma, I'm hungry." "Humph. You won't die from a little hunger." Sandy dragged her out of the cupboard. Didi could barely stand still, and the arm that was being grasped by Sandy gradually became numb. "Hurry up. If you dare to delay my escape, I'll kill you." Didi did not dare to speak anymore. She endured the discomfort and hunger and followed her grandmother. Sandy took her out of the guest room, but right when they arrived at the elevator lobby, 3 bodyguards in black walked out from the shadows. Upon seeing them, Sandy's expression changed 180 degrees. "You people." An excruciating pain hit the back of her neck as she was assaulted from behind, and she lost consciousness almost immediately. After the bodyguards caught her, they took her back to the guest room, kicked the door, went in with the unconscious woman and her luggage, and then closed the door. Another bodyguard picked up Didi, who did not even have the strength to yell. She lay on the shoulders of the bodyguard and closed her eyes. The next day, Colton brought Freya to the hospital. Freya pushed open the door of the ward and saw Didi lying on the hospital bed with an infusion set hanging right next to the bed. There were also scratches on her forehead. Freya's heart felt a jolt of electricity piercing through it as if someone was crushing her heart in their palm. She hurried to the edge of the bed and held Didi's hand. Didi gradually opened her eyes and saw that it was Freya. Then, her dull eyes lit up instantly. "Auntie." "Didi, I'm sorry. It's all Auntie's fault." Freya's eyes were bloodshot, and she gently stroked her forehead with her palm. "Does it hurt?" When Didi said it hurt, Freya could no longer hold back her tears. Although she was not her biological child, she had been there since day one, watching over her little niece. Colton stood at the door with a calm expression, and the bodyguard walked up to him. "Mr. Goldman." Colton closed the door gently and walked to the corridor with the bodyguard. "What did the doctor say?" This child had been starving for a day and a night, and she wasn't even allowed to drink. They had to give her a few bottles of nutrient solution to satisfy her nutritional needs and hunger. And apart from the scratch on her forehead, there was a huge bruise on her back. It was severely swollen. After his report on Didi's physical condition, he continued. "The situation that I saw yesterday seems to have been caused by the child, who was pushed against the table with a brutally harsh force. It's estimated that the woman made a move on the girl." Colton's eyes dimmed. "Collect the evidence and the child's confession. That'll be more than enough." The bodyguard nodded. "Understood." Colton went back to the ward. Freya turned to look at him, and her eyes were still teary. She said something to Didi, then got up and walked toward him. She hit her. Didi had told her everything too. Colton frowned. "Leave this to me." Freya felt a profound irritation in her nasal cavity and took a deep breath. "I don't understand why she would hate us so much, just because we're girls." "Freya Pruitt." He called her by her full name, but his voice sounded very soft. "You've done nothing wrong. We humans can't choose our own family and gender from birth, so we don't need to look for problems in ourselves. Don't worry about these issues anymore." Freya lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry."